Hello everyone, I am Dr. Prabhashini Vijayavantha, Senior Lecturer attached to the Department of Human Resource Management, Faculty of Commerce and Management Studies, University of Kelaniya. The topic for the today's lesson is International Business Environment. So, as students studying the subject international management, you all know that when it comes to organizations do not operate in a vacuum. They operate within the environment. We identify it as the organizational environment. I am sure you all have studied the topic organizational environment under the subject principles of management in your first year. So we call it either the organizational environment, the business environment, or sometimes in a marketing context, we refer to it as the marketing environment. So when it comes to an organization, organizations operate within this environment, and as a result, the parties and other things involved within that environment are having an impact on the business. In a similar vein, the business will also have an impact on the sources, forces, etc. operating in the business environment. So, when it comes to an internationally operating organization, irrespective of whether it is a small and medium scale enterprise or a large multinational corporation, if it is operating internationally, the business environment that affects it is the international business environment, which means the business environment here includes the local business environment as well as the foreign country's business environment. So, under the topic international business environment, these are the areas that we are planning to discuss. This is the session outline. So, we'll start by discussing about the typical challenges faced by international managers. The managers who work in internationally operating business organizations are identified as international managers irrespective of their particular business function. And while managing or running the business, they face a number of challenges. We identify them as the typical or usual or common challenges faced by international managers. So, we will discuss that and then move on to different parts or components or segments of the business environment. Starting from the political environment. Keep in mind that under this topic or under this lesson, we are mainly focusing about the factors or actors within the macro environment. So, when you talk about organizational environment or business environment, you all may have observed that for academic purposes, we have divided the business environment into two categories as the micro environment and the macro environment. So we all know what is the micro environment. Another term to refer to the microenvironment is the internal environment. And the other term to refer to the macro environment is the external environment. So, we all know who are the actors and forces operating within the microenvironment. So here our discussion is mainly targeted or focused towards the macro environmental factors and forces. Under that, let's start with the political environment. So you all will see how the changes taking place within the political environment of one country may affect not only that country but also other countries in the world while doing business. Secondly, the economic environment. So that will indicate what will happen when there are changes taking place in the economy of the country and the world. So I hope you all are carefully monitoring, listening, watching and studying what's going on in the political and economic environment of Sri Lanka. So it's very important that you follow these things because they will provide you with lot of examples for the lessons learned in the classroom. Moving on to the technological environment, under this we will discuss what are the new technological discoveries, findings and new equipment available to make our business processes more productive, efficient and effective. We all know that technological environment plays a very critical role these days due to the COVID-19 outbreak in the world, because people had to restrict themselves or stay inside houses and also maintain social distance. Given that situation, people are unable to get together and work together. Given this scenario, we have moved on to get the maximum use out of technological environment, and as a result most of the things are happening with the use of information and communication technology. And next we will discuss about the legal environment. So under the legal environment, we discuss what is the law that is prevailing in the country, whether it's Roman Dutch law, the English law, the Islamic law, the Tesavalame, what is it? So I'm sure you all have studied about the legal environment of Sri Lanka under the subject business law in your first year, and you all will learn further, or you all may be currently learning more about employment law in your third year. So you all may know more than me about the legal environment. So however, it's important for us to focus about the constitution and acts and any other regulations that govern how businesses operate in Sri Lanka. And finally, the focus should be on the socio-cultural environment. So the socio-cultural environment refers to what are the changes that are taking place in the external environment with regard to the society. And also cultural environment, cultural beliefs, values, systems, practices, etc. So those things I'm not going to discuss in this lecture, because you all have a separate session on culture with Dr. Ishankar. And also, due to the lack of time availability during the lecture, we are not focusing about the ecological environment as well. Instead, you all have to do some self-studies to find out what is the ecological environment, who are the actors or sources within it, and how does international business operations affect the ecological environment of a business. So let's start by looking at the typical or commonly observed challenges faced by the international managers while they operate in the international market. So, the first or the most important challenge or the major challenge that they face comes from national politics of the home country as well as the host country. We all know that politicians are the party people who control a country. So therefore, the political decisions made at the parliament may affect business operations. Like now, if you take in Sri Lanka, for an example, the sudden decision to convert from chemical fertilizer to organic fertilizer, or any other things like to stop repatriation of profits by foreign companies to their home countries. So like that, the political leaders of different countries may take or make certain decisions which may affect business operations both positively and negatively. And therefore, the international managers should be capable enough of handling these challenges. Next is terrorism. We all know with our experience previously in Sri Lanka how strong the terrorist groups are. There are different terrorist groups around the world, like the LTTE, Al-Qaeda, like that. There are different terrorist groups and they spread terrorism, including blasts, attacks, etc. So all these things affect both positively and negatively towards business. If you all know how the tourism and the hospitality industry started collapsing in 2019 with the Easter Sunday bombing. The next is about culture. So culture is the most important variable that the international managers have to deal with very carefully. But as I mentioned previously, I'm not going to discuss and spend time about culture because it is covered in a separate lesson. So the next major challenge faced by international managers is about global competition. Many business organizations nowadays do not face only local competition from the local suppliers and producers. Instead, they face global competition. So, if it is expensive to manufacture locally, many countries or their people tend to import from other countries and use. So, as a result, the competition comes not only from local suppliers or local producers, but from foreign suppliers, producers, and foreign markets as well. So, the competition has become more complex and rigorous, and this has to be dealt with very carefully. Moving on to technology. We all know that daily we observe different types of advancements in technology. If you take mobile phones, computers, CCTV cameras, TVs, radios, PABS systems, lot of things. All those things include technology. Out of these, the most dominant source is the internet and associated different softwares that has been developed by different software engineers. And a final challenge that a business will have to handle very carefully are their societal obligations. They have multiple obligations towards the society. So these are mainly what is covered under corporate social responsibility. So the society is obliged or expected to society expects certain things from the organizations. So business organizations may have to do things like price reduction, ensuring product availability, community development. Like that, there are different obligations or responsibilities towards the society that businesses have to fulfill. And these challenges may have to be dealt with very carefully, focusing on the local environmental factors by international managers. Starting our discussion with the political environment, we all know that the countries are ruled by different politicians and political parties at different times. And the business organizations need to focus on their manifesto or any other political documents and political vision to see whether these leaders are supporting these foreign businesses to enter their countries and operate. In one hand, on the other hand, before a business enters into a particular country to do business, they have to pay their serious attention about the internal political problems prevailing in the country. For an example, one thing that political problems are largely created is ethnicity. We all know that there are a lot of ethnic conflicts in different countries which has ultimately led to political instability. So, ethnicity is a major driving force behind political instability, behind the unstable political setting around the world. If you take for an example, in Zambia in 1990s, the then president Frederick Chiluba tried to block political opponent and former president Dr. Kenneth Kaunda from standing for office. So, in Zambia, which is an African country, in the 1990s, the then president Frederick Chiluba tried to block or stop his political opponent and previous president of Zambia, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, from standing for office or contesting for the election. On which basis? On the grounds that his parents, that is Dr. Kenneth Kaunda's parents, were from Malawi or were Malawi nationals, and therefore Frederick Chiluba announced that Dr. Kenneth Kaunda is not fully a Zambian citizen and therefore he does not have the rights to contest for the election. Continuing our discussion about the political environment, in addition to the ethnicity, another factor that largely affects or creates political instability in the countries is the religion. So if you look at religion, religious disputes lie at the heart of regional instabilities. So there are religious disputes between people belonging to different religions in countries. And this kind of religious disputes lie at the heart of the regional instabilities such as in Middle East and Africa. For an example, if you take former Yugoslavia, it got divided into parts due to this problem. Then Northern Ireland, there was a religious dispute some time back. We often see there are religious disputes which always cause regional instability in the Middle East region with terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And also there is this Boko Haram terrorist group, and in Africa also we see lot of religious disputes, and every day there are disputes between India and Pakistan in the Jammu Kashmir due to these religious differences. So given this situation in the political environment, how should the international organizations operate? So what do proactive global firms do? Proactive global firms or global organizations maintain an up-to-date profile of the political and economic environments of these countries. So these companies, before they enter these markets, maintain an up-to-date profile, which we call country profiling, of the political and economic environment of the countries that they have plans to invest in the future. And after studying and carefully monitoring this profile for a considerable period of time, they would implement the decision to invest. And also, they regularly maintain profiles of countries that they currently operate. And if there are any kind of a risk or a threat, they take precautionary measures or steps accordingly. Given this situation, the managers of internationally operating organizations must understand the ethnic and religious composition of a country that they operate. So the managers should study the demographics of these countries to find out who are the majority nationals of the particular country. What is the main religion that everybody is following? Like that, they need to study demographic reports and find out the ethnic and religious composition of people of a country that they operate or do business. By studying this, they can anticipate or predetermine the operational problems that they might have to face in the future. So then they can find some solutions or be prepared for such operational problems that may be encountered by their company. And also they can predict beforehand about the problems of general political instability in the countries. So these problems of general political instability will not only affect one business, but it may affect many businesses operating in that country. Talking about these talking about how ethnicity and religion of people would affect or have an impact on business, there is one example in Malaysia where in Malaysia, whenever there is a business, whenever a foreign company starts a business in Malaysia, there is a particular employment quota that should be allocated for the indigenous Malays versus the Chinese nationals in that country. By implementing this regulation, the Malaysian government is ensuring that the indigenous Malays are getting jobs in foreign businesses over the migrant Chinese workers. So like that, the political environment has to be handled with very much care and attention. So why should we handle this political environment, or why should a business manage this political environment? It is mainly because otherwise there is a huge political risk involved in doing businesses in foreign countries. So what is meant by political risk? Political risk refers to any governmental action or politically motivated event that could adversely affect the long-run profitability or value of a firm. So, political risk refers to any governmental action, any action or decision taken by the government. Like for an example, in Sri Lanka, banning chemical fertilizer or stopping vehicle imports. Like that, any governmental action or any politically motivated event like a protest, a sabotage, or anything that could adversely or negatively affect or influence the long-term profitability of a business. Which means these kind of acts by the government may affect the business or the value of the firm. For an example, some time back when Venezuela was ruled by former President Hugo Chavez, the government took control of all the cement plants and offices belonging to Mexico located in Venezuela. Why? Because the Venezuelan government failed to reach an agreement or a consensus during the negotiations or talks on nationalization. We will discuss nationalization later, or else you may search what is nationalization. Focusing on another example, in Bolivia, the Bolivian presidents moved to nationalize the national or the government gas industry, followed the actions taken by Venezuela for other industries. So these kind of incidents may cause huge losses in terms of the success of the business, and as a result, they become huge political risk events. As we now know what is political risk, let's look at what are the typical political risk events or common political risk events that a company or an international firm may have to face. So as mentioned in the previous slide, one of the very commonest examples about political risk events is nationalization. So, what is nationalization? Let's see. Nationalization refers to forced sale of MNC's assets or equity to local buyers from the host country with less below book value or no compensation. So under nationalization, a company, a foreign firm is forced by the government of the host country to do what? To sell the foreign companies, that is multinational corporations, all the assets and all the equity, that is the full investment, to the local buyers. The government may identify a buyer from the host country itself. And when they do this sale, the sale happens with less or no compensation. So that is, the sale happens with below the book value. So if the company's value of the company's assets and equity is X, the sale takes place, the transaction takes place below that value. Or sometimes, for no compensation at all, the government will forcefully acquire the assets. So these things happened especially in Venezuela, Chile, Cuba, like that. So for an example, some time back, there was a dictator ruler called Augusto Pinochet in Chile. So this former Chilean dictator, Augusto Pinochet, nationalized all the assets of all the multinational corporations which were in Chile. As a result, many companies may have been hesitant to invest in Chile thereafter. So if you take the policy of America or USA, this is a statement below in the picture, a statement made by the former president of USA, Mr. Donald Trump. So he says, we are a country not based on nationalizing our business. So he says United States of America is a country which is not based or focused on nationalizing the businesses in their country. Call a person over in Venezuela. So as I mentioned previously, in Venezuela, many businesses, many foreign and local businesses were taken over by the government. Ask them, how did nationalization of their businesses work out? So according to this capitalistic viewpoint propagated by the USA, they say nationalization does not work well. It is not working too well. So then when it comes to nationalization, this nationalization, which is a typical political risk event, can be further divided into two categories. As what? As expropriation and confiscation. So what is expropriation and what is confiscation? Let's see. Expropriation is when a local government, that is the government of the host country, takes hold of or take the control of the assets and equity of a foreign-owned firm and provide inadequate compensation. So the government of the host country will provide compensation definitely, but it is below the book value, which means the compensation is inadequate and the foreign firm will have to experience a huge loss. When a local government takes hold of and provides inadequate compensation for the foreign-owned assets of a firm. For an example, in 1938, the Mexican president signed an order that expropriated almost all the foreign oil companies operating in Mexico. So in 1938, the Mexican president signed an order to do what? That expropriated almost all the foreign oil companies, which means the government took over all the foreign oil companies operating in Mexico. How does confiscation differ from expropriation? Confiscation is also a method of nationalization like expropriation. Then what is the difference? Under this situation, the local government takes hold or takes the control or the ownership of the foreign-owned assets, the assets of the foreign-owned firm or the equity, and no compensation is provided at all. When no compensation is provided. In Cuba, the former Cuban president Fidel Castro once grabbed or took over or took the hold of all the assets of the US companies which were operating in Cuba without paying any compensation or any money to the foreign firms. So that is confiscation. Continuing our discussion about typical political risk events faced by organizations operating in foreign countries, one of the major challenges that they face is loss of technology and intellectual property rights. Sometimes some companies may bring in or introduce technology from their parent country to the host country. In that case, before that, such technology may not have been used by the host country. But however, based on the nature of the political leadership, the political leaders may decide to take over that technology or imitate that technology and use it in other industries which are competing with this global company. And also sometimes the companies may not get their intellectual property rights. So when it comes to intellectual property rights, it mainly includes patent rights, trademarks, and trade names. The next type of political risk event faced by organizations is that the governments and the political parties of host countries may try to interfere or influence in the managerial decisions made by the subsidiary of the global organization located in that particular country. For an example, they may stop recruiting people or getting people from third countries and instead force the management of the company to recruit people, recruit natives. So this kind of things, this kind of decisions which are made by the management of the host company under the influence of the national government of the host country may have a negative impact on the standardized policies of the business. The next challenge that is faced by global organizations is dishonesty by the government officials. This is very common and you all may have heard very well about this situation in third world developing countries, especially in the Asian and African continents. Under this situation, most of the government organizations that these multinational companies have to deal with may behave in a dishonest way. So these officials may sometimes ask for bribes or require the companies to engage in their or support their corruption efforts. And sometimes if these companies do not agree with these dishonest demands from these government officials, they may go to the extent of cancelling the contractual agreements between the government and the company, or sometimes they may try to alter or change or amend the contractual agreements in such a way that the company will find it unfavorable for them. The next challenge faced by the multinational corporations is the discriminatory treatment against foreign firms in the application of regulations or laws. So, there are a lot of arguments on this idea. Some people argue that the companies of their own country should get more privileges over foreign companies doing business in a foreign location. So, however, the multinational corporations or global companies believe or consider this situation as a discriminatory or kind of unfair treatment against foreign firms or foreign companies in the application of regulations or the laws of the host country, so that the government may execute or implement the rules, regulations, laws, acts, etc. in two different ways, where sometimes the local companies may get favorable treatment and the foreign companies may get unfavorable treatment. Then the next challenge faced by most of the companies operating in third world developing countries are the barriers or rules imposed by the host country government to repatriate funds. So why do they need to repatriate funds? What do you mean by the repatriation of funds? After making a huge investment and starting up a business in a foreign country in the form of an FDI or a foreign direct investment, the companies expect to earn huge profits from that business. And after earning profits, while reinvesting some of those profits in the business itself, the companies try to repatriate or send back a portion of those profits back to their home country. And that is called repatriation of profits. And sometimes certain governments like that in Venezuela have not allowed the foreign companies to repatriate the funds or profits earned in their country back to the home country. Instead, the governments have asked these companies to reinvest those profits in their own country. And those are the problems related to repatriation of funds and mainly the profits. So now we have discussed about a considerable number of political risk events faced by global organizations or foreign companies while they operate in foreign locations. And these political risk events can be theoretically categorized into two categories. So these political risk events can be categorized as macro political risk events and micro political risk events. That's why we say these risk events can be macro or micro. So let us see what are the macro political risk events. Macro political risk events are the events that affect all foreign companies operating or doing business in a particular country or a region. So, now this macro political risk events, as you all already know, are affecting a larger group of companies. So then, these macro political risk events are events that affect or impact or influence what? Influence all the foreign companies, not just one company or a selected group of companies, but all the foreign companies. Doing what? Operating or doing business in a particular country or region. Operating or doing business in a particular country. Let's say Venezuela, Cuba, Afghanistan, like that, or a particular region such as the Middle East region or Asia Pacific region, like that. So what are the examples coming here? Terrorism in Afghanistan. So we all know until Barack Obama, the former president of America, killed Osama bin Laden through American troops, there was huge terrorism in Afghanistan managed by the terrorist group called Al-Qaeda. So this was a common set of terrorism activities taking place in Afghanistan. You all may be able to recall these terrorism activities there. You all may remember how these terrorist groups destroyed this ancient Bamiyan Buddha statues as well. So, these kind of terrorist activities are affecting all the foreign companies operating or doing business in the country of Afghanistan. Let's look at another example. You all may have not heard sometimes, but definitely your parents would know about the Gulf War. If you all have not heard about the Gulf War, it's very important to search the Google and find out some information about the Gulf War. Gulf War happened when we were very small. That was in 1990. So Gulf War took place when Iraq, actually its president Saddam Hussein, who was a former president of Iraq, invaded the country of Kuwait. For what? Because they wanted to take over the oil resource in Kuwait. So this ultimately became a huge war and it was named as the Gulf War. So you may search about this Iraq's invasion led by Saddam Hussein of Kuwait in the Middle East in 1990. So this Gulf War was an event that affected or impacted all the foreign companies operating or doing business in the Middle East region. It affected not only the foreign companies but also a large number of housemates who had gone to Middle East countries from Sri Lanka, and I remember many of them had to come back to Sri Lanka. So, which halted all international business with and within both countries. So, this Gulf War halted or temporarily stopped all the international business activities with both countries and within both countries. The next category of political risk events, as we discussed previously, are the micro-political risk events. So what are micro-political risk events? Micro-political risk events are political risk events taking place in a particular country which are smaller in scale and they affect only one particular industry or a firm or only a few companies in a particular country. So, micro-political risk events have an effect or impact only on one particular industry, such as the pharmaceutical industry, dairy industry, or maybe let's say fast-moving consumer goods production. So like that, it affects only one particular industry or maybe one firm. If you can recall your memories, you may remember there was once a huge criticism towards the Anchor milk powder brand and the Fonterra brand, the Fonterra products of Fonterra company. So that is a particular firm or only a few companies, like few companies in the dairy industry, like let's say Nestle, Fonterra, like that, or only a few companies in a particular country. So in that case, the impact is smaller compared to a macro political risk event. Why? Because only the companies of one particular industry or few companies or just one firm is affected. However, these micro political risk events have become more common nowadays, not like in the past. In the past, there were a lot of macro-political risk events, but now these have become more common than the macro-political risk events. For an example, USA companies being harassed in Venezuela. We all know, and it's obvious, that there is a huge dispute politically, or rather a Cold War between Venezuela and United States of America. So the USA-based companies which are having their operations or subsidiaries in Venezuela quite often gets harassed by the Venezuelan national government. So in that case, that is a micro-political risk event. Why? Because these harassments by the Venezuelan national government is only targeted at a few companies in Venezuela. Those few companies are only having their headquarters in USA. The companies, the foreign companies, other foreign companies operating in Venezuela do not face this problem. Similarly, because of this killing of Saddam Hussein from Iraq, there are anti-American policies in Iraq. So always the Iraqi government holds anti-American policies, which means they have government policies against America. As a result, what happens? Most of the companies, American-based or US-based companies operating in Iraq may face problems. And the problem with this micro-political risk events is that they cannot be insured by political risk insurers. So we are not going to talk or discuss under this subject or this lesson about political risk insurance. But when it comes to the subject of insurance, if you study in depth about insurance, you may hear that you normally in insurance, what do we insure? We insure for the risk. So political risk is one form of risk faced by business organizations. So then companies can insure themselves for political risk with insurance companies. But unfortunately, remember that companies cannot insure themselves or their company under political risk insurers for micro-political risk events. Another type of risk which is largely associated with political risk is the terrorism risk. So in most textbooks, they discuss terrorism risk as a part of political risk. That is, of course, very correct in my opinion, because most of the terrorist groups and terrorist activities are politically motivated by the political parties. So, multinational corporations operating in foreign countries often have to face and deal with the terrorism risk. So, we all know that terrorism has become a very serious problem nowadays all over the world. From 1983 up to 2009 and even until now, Sri Lanka is suffering because of a major guerrilla terrorist group called the LTTE. In addition, if we recall the Easter Sunday bombings which took place in 2019 April, again that was another kind of terrorist attack that happened in Sri Lanka. So these kinds of terrorist problems are not only there or common in Sri Lanka, but they are very common in other parts of the world as well, including the most powerful nation in the world, that is USA. So, given this situation, the countries or nations which were previously regarded or earlier considered as safe from terrorist threats are risky now. So after 2019, even we thought Sri Lanka is safe. But till 2019, till the Easter Sunday bombings, we did not know that Sri Lanka has become risky again. So this situation is again common for other countries as well. So the United States of America, for an example, did not think that they are a risky country until the September 11th attacks. We hope you all could remember about the September 11 attacks. And if in case you don't know or you are less aware about this, please search the internet and find out about the famous September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center in New York, USA. So this World Trade Center was a very important economics central building, and 80 countries lost citizens due to this bombing attack because people from 80 countries had been working in that building. Forgetting USA, again as I mentioned a little while ago, our own incident of Easter Sunday bombings which took place in Sri Lanka in April 2019, killing more than 300 people in Catholic places of religious observances, is a very miserable incident. And these kinds of incidents happening in countries is a huge risk or a danger to the lives of company personnel working in foreign countries, because the employees will never be willing to go and work in such countries with huge terrorist problems, because then thereby they will be putting their life into a risk. And similarly, the companies will also not be willing to make investments in those countries. Why? Because if they invest their money and build up assets in such foreign locations, and if they get destroyed due to a terrorist attack, that is a huge risk to their corporate assets. So risks to those company personnel and assets is a huge problem. And you all may remember that most of these companies and countries did not come to invest in Sri Lanka and start doing business in Sri Lanka till we ended the war in 2009. Because such terrorist activities are thereby interrupting or disturbing the business activities. If you all remember, some time ago, there was this ISIS terrorist group operating in Nigeria, and they once kidnapped a Sri Lankan engineer who was working in a foreign-based company. And such incidents are happening in South America and Middle East as well. And these kinds of terrorism incidents are largely affecting the small and medium scale enterprises who are doing business abroad because they do not have huge amounts of money to mitigate those risks. And another group of industries which are largely affected by this are the global airlines. And then the hospitality industry. If you think about the hospitality industry in Sri Lanka, you may have already heard and seen on news that the hospitality industry in Sri Lanka, which boomed after the 2009 victory of the war, started collapsing in 2019 with the Easter Sunday bombings, as especially some of the bombs blasted in those major hotels in Colombo. And thereafter, they were further affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, which affects the tourism industry badly. And also these kinds of terrorist activities are largely affecting the financial markets. And you all may have heard about the impact of these incidents on financial markets under the subject financial management. So, then what are the methods used by business organizations in managing terrorism risk? So, given the present situation in the world, it is obvious and clear that the terrorism is present everywhere in the world and every country in the world. As a result, the organizations cannot stop doing business. Instead, they should try how to manage terrorism risk and still continue their business activities. So then, let's see what are the methods used by organizations to manage terrorism risk. Companies are trying to develop a generous image through charitable contributions to the local community. So, when companies are doing business in foreign countries, what they do is they try or they take their efforts to develop a generous image. So companies largely engage in their image building activities where they try to develop a generous image for their company. That means they try to develop an image as a generous company among whom? Among the local community in the foreign country. How are they doing that? By engaging lot of charity activities or giving donations to the local community or making charitable contributions so that the people in the local community will develop a positive image towards the company and they would develop a strong rapport with the company, and as a result what would happen, the company they would focus on the company and protect the company against this kind of terrorist activities. IBM and Exxon are two companies who have focused on developing this generous image. And also, in contrast, there are some other companies who maintain a low profile and minimize publicity. While one group of companies are trying to develop a generous image within the local community, there are another group of companies who try to maintain or keep a low profile for them, which means they try to always minimize or reduce their level of publicity, which means they do not engage in much publicity. Instead, they try to hide themselves and operate so that nobody would pay their attention about this company and try to attack this company. That maintaining a low profile and minimizing publicity is also a very good and wise strategy to mitigate terrorism risk. The other strategies used by organizations to manage terrorism risk are using teams to monitor terrorist activities. These organizations have employed a separate team of employees from within the organization or have obtained the services of an outside expert team to monitor the terrorist activities that are taking place in the countries that they engage in business. The examples for this includes kidnappings of foreigners in Latin America to raise money for political activities. So, in many of the Latin American countries, when organizations do engage in business, they employ expatriate employees or expatriates, and they are foreigners from a Latin American perspective. And these foreigners had been kidnapped by most of the local terrorist groups asking for ransom, or rather to raise money for the terrorist activities and political activities managed by these terrorist groups. In these situations, the companies have deployed special teams to monitor these kinds of activities, and companies have started taking precautionary measures to prevent the occurrence of these incidents for their companies and their staff. And such similar terrorist activities include hijacking of airplanes, especially in the Middle East, and also blackmailing certain countries or their political leaders for release of political prisoners held in these countries to in replacement to release the kidnapped employees belonging to those countries. So such kinds of incident also, these kinds of incidents will also attack or damage the national political security as well. And therefore, these companies are advised by their home countries to take precautionary measures when they start doing business in countries with terrorist activities. Another strategy adopted by organizations is hiring counter-terrorism consultants. That means these companies are either employing within their organizations or getting the services of consultancy firms. So when it comes to hiring on board, usually they hire employees who had been previously in the military or in state intelligence services, and they act for the company as counter-terrorism consultants. So, as consultants, these people will provide the company with the necessary advice on how to counter-attack terrorist activities that have already occurred and also that may occur in the future. So, such consultants train these employees on coping, managing, or dealing with these threats related to terrorism. Next type of environmental factor that we need to consider is the economic environment. So, we all know that economic environment is also a part of the external environment of any organization. It's a macro political element and also a major factor among the pestle factors. And under economic environment, we look at how the economy of the home country is operating and how the economy of the host country is operating and how the regional and the world economy is operating and what are the associated economic risks. So, one of the common facts that we all know through common sense and general knowledge is that the economic stability and economic growth of a particular country or a region is closely related to political stability. So, if a country is having a stable government and if there is political stability with a majority political power, and if there are no terrorist activities and riots in that country, then that country is experiencing political stability, or we identify those countries as politically stable. So, countries with such political stability have a stable economic condition or a positive economic environment. In most cases, such countries have a positive economic growth and therefore it's good to invest in those countries as the economic risk of those countries is very low. So that is why we always say that political stability is the key as it is very important for any country to achieve economic growth and economic stability. That is why most of the terrorist groups and other external parties who are against a particular country try to make that country politically unstable, because then they know or they understand that they can attack all the other factors of that country, such as the economy. So, how do you determine that a country's economic environment is positive and there is no economic risk? According to the economists, it is determined or decided by a country's ability or intention to meet its financial obligations. Economic risk or the economic environmental stability is determined or decided by whom? By a particular country's ability or capability, or rather the intention to meet its financial obligations. So, what do you mean by the financial obligations? Financial obligations refers to the obligations that a country would have towards the other external parties, such as foreign organizations and countries. So basically, this refers to the ability of a country to pay back its external debts without getting them to become arrears. So, at the present moment, or this year is the year that Sri Lanka has to pay back the highest amount of its financial obligations. So we all know that with the Easter Sunday bombings, the COVID-19 pandemic, and also other incidents happening in Sri Lanka is not in a very good financial or an economic condition. So nowadays everybody is looking at how Sri Lanka is going to pay back its financial obligations. So it would be very important as undergraduate students from the commerce stream to observe or closely monitor the strategies adopted by Sri Lanka in this situation. And another factor that would determine the country's economic environment is its level of economic development. Whether a country is experiencing or enjoying a higher level of economic development or a lower level of economic development. So once again, I'm sure you all may have studied for economics about the factors determining economic development in a country. And I am sure you all know the difference between economic growth and economic development. So, higher the economic stability of a particular country, lower the economic risk in that country, and vice versa. So, many foreign organizations and countries evaluate or study the economic risk level or the risk rating of a particular country before they make financial loans or they provide financial grants. Often, countries like Sri Lanka and other less developed countries tend to pose or experience more risk than developed countries, and it has been a very common situation or scenario throughout. Considering about the types of economic risk faced by business organizations, or the categories of economic risk faced by business organizations operating in foreign countries, academics have identified two main categories of economic risk, and a subsidiary in a specific country may lose profitability due to these two types of economic risk. A subsidiary of a large multinational enterprise in a specific country may lose its profitability and face economic risk due to sudden changes in domestic monetary and fiscal policies of a country. So, the company may face the risk due to sudden changes or immediate or overnight changes in the domestic or local monetary and fiscal policies of a particular country that they are doing business. So we all know that as students who have studied economics for both A levels as well as who have studied economics during your first year of the degree program, that the monetary policy is associated with the interest rates and the banking system, and the fiscal policy is associated with the government's budget. So certain budgetary decisions may or sudden changes made to the economic approach, like where the Sri Lankan government restricting imports may create losses for certain multinational corporations. And also, a subsidiary of a multinational corporation may lose profitability due to gradual changes that may take place in the foreign investment policies of a particular country. So, there are certain policies adopted by certain countries regarding how they would encourage and entertain foreign investments in the local economy. And that includes foreign direct investments. And so this kind of policy would cover or include the government decisions making companies unable to repatriate earnings, include inability or decisions made by the governments preventing or stopping companies from repatriating their corporate earnings back to the home country. I think we've discussed it previously as well under repatriation of profits and capital, and also about the interest rate unpredictability. So there may be situations in a national economy where the interest rate is fluctuating in an unpredictable and unexpected manner. And the final type includes the currency translation exposure. So this includes how the company would allow the foreign companies to translate or convert foreign currencies to the local currencies, the rates, the dollar rate, etc. Next, we'll move on to the next type of environment, which is the legal environment. So, the legal environment covers the legal system of a particular country or the law of the country. So, when a multinational company is doing business abroad in a foreign country, it must study the legal system of the foreign location. And the legal department of the company will support the management in this regard. The global managers must consult legal services both locally and at HQs to comply with host country regulations and to maintain cooperative long-term relationships. Global managers or international managers must consult or get the advice of legal services or law firms, both locally, that is in the home country, as well as the host country, and at the headquarters to comply or adhere with the host country regulations or rules and regulations imposed by the host country's government towards foreign companies doing business in their country, and also to help those countries to maintain or continue a cooperative or a supportive long-term relationship with the government of the host country. So it's important to get the services beforehand of a local legal firm. And when it comes to the legal environment, it consists of local laws and legal systems of those countries in which an international company operates, and of international law which governs relationships between independent countries. So, when it comes to an organization, it has to focus on the local laws and legal systems of the host country. So, there are local laws governing the local activities in the host country, and there are different legal systems in those countries. Like some time back, the northern part of Sri Lanka had this Desavalame law, and sometimes this Muslims had this Sharia law. And in Sri Lanka, in general, we use the Roman Dutch law. So like that, there are different legal systems in those countries in which an international company operates. So the tricky part here is that if one company headquartered in UK has subsidiaries in, let's say, Indonesia and India, the local laws and legal systems of both India and Indonesia need to be studied because the host countries' laws are applicable to those subsidiaries. And also, the company has to pay attention about the common international law as well. So, these common international laws governs or controls or guides the relationships between independent countries or nations. An example of an international law is the United Nations or the UN Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods, or the CISG. So it's important that a company would study this and also adhere to this or abide by this in selling goods in the international market. As we had been discussing about different legal systems prevailing in different countries in the previous slide, let us have a short or a brief look at the different types of legal systems prevailing in countries that multinational companies operate. As you all have studied law in your first year as business law, and as you study corporate law in your third year, I am not going to discuss in detail about these legal systems. So one of the main types of legal systems operating is the common law. So, this common law uses past court decisions as examples. Under this system, the decisions regarding court cases are made by using or referring to past or previous court decisions as a reference, or a guide, or a base, or an example. This common law legal system is used in the United States and 26 other countries of English origin or influence. The other legal system is the civil law. The civil law represents a comprehensive set of laws organized into a code. So, the civil law system represents a comprehensive or a very detailed set of laws organized into a code, and it's used in about 70 countries, including Japan and many other countries in Europe. And the final legal system that we are going to pay our attention is the Islamic law or the Muslim law. So as the name implies, you would understand that this law is mainly implemented in Muslim countries, which are mainly the Middle East countries. The Muslim law or the Islamic law is based on the religious beliefs of the Islamic people. And it has been developed by combining the common law, civil law, and also the indigenous laws of certain countries to varying degrees. As I mentioned previously, it's used in Islamic countries in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia. After that brief discussion about the legal environment, let us move on to the technological environment. So, what do you mean by the technological environment? We all know that given the COVID-19 pandemic in the world, technology plays a crucial or a critical role. The technology includes most of the capital equipment used in organizations, factories, as well as the ICT equipments. The appropriability of technology is very important in international business. What do you mean by the appropriability? Appropriability refers to the ability of the firm to profit from its own technology by protecting it from the competitors. So, when it comes to an organization, they use their own technology. And this technology may have been invented by they themselves within the organization, or they may have bought in or copied from somebody else. But when a company goes to a foreign country, they may have to do the technology transfer as well. And in this scenario, they have to be very careful. Why? Because the ability of the firm to profit from its own technology in a foreign location is very important. The firm should be able or capable to earn profits from its own technology in the host location as well, as then only the firms will be able to achieve economies of scale, and thereby it will be able to protect their technology from the imitation of competitors. Because if the technology is imitated by the competitors, then the company will not be able to profit thereafter. So that is why we say all these sources except the human resource is possible to be copied. However, to minimize the rate of taking over or copying of technology, the companies are using different methods of protection. So they are using these methods to protect their own technology from the competitors. And that includes obtaining patent rights for their products or inventions and having a trademark like McDonald's, or trade names like Coca-Cola, and copyrights especially for publications, and protecting certain trade secrets. When it comes to this manufacture of these vaccines, developed for the COVID-19, you may have observed that most of these vaccines were invented in Western countries like USA, Russia, and UK. And also the Sinopharm was invented in China. And all these countries, though they are granting permission or allowing other countries to manufacture the vaccines, they are not sharing the formulae with them, and it would remain as a trade secret of those companies. And they would only share the bottling part for these companies. As we had finished discussing about the legal environment, let's move on to discuss about the technological environment. So we all know that nowadays we see quite a number of capital intensive industries, and technology plays a crucial role. And we all know that given the COVID-19 pandemic situation in the world, technology plays a dominant role. And technology refers to the capital equipment used in manufacturing plants, logistics processes, and all the other IT equipment. So, when it comes to technology, the companies have to be mindful of the appropriability of technology. What do you mean by the appropriability of technology? It refers to the ability of the firm to profit from its own technology by protecting it from the competitors. The appropriability of technology refers to the ability or capability of the firm or a business organization to earn profits from its own technology, either invented by it, by protecting it from competitors even in the foreign location. Usually technology can be copied. So it's very important that the companies take preventive measures to protect it from being copied by the competitors. Because from the point that it is copied by the competitors, the company will lose the competitive advantage over the competitors. So then, what are the methods that can be used by organizations as methods of protection? The companies can get the patent rights, or they may have trademarks, like you may see the letter M of McDonald's, or trade names like Coca-Cola, or copyrights, which is often seen with intellectual property and publications, so that the copyright owner has the right and the others cannot be copied, and others cannot copy it without taking the required permission from the copyright holder. And the trade secrets. We know when it comes to this manufacture of the vaccines for this COVID-19, most of these vaccines were found in Western countries. The formulas for these vaccines were developed in Western countries like USA, UK, and Russia. And also Sinopharm was produced in China. So when it comes to these countries, They maintain the trade secret regarding the formulae of the vaccine. Even though they grant the permission for countries like Sri Lanka that is only for bottling, and they would never give the complete manufacturing rights because it would remain as a trade secret of their own company. When it comes to the technological environment, what are the other problems or issues faced by the organizations? One thing is the inappropriate use of technology by others. So, when it comes to multinational corporations, when they are starting their operations in foreign countries, in certain instances, they go and make the complete investment as a foreign direct investment and start with a wholly owned subsidiary. In other instances, they get into partnerships with local companies in the host country. And under that, these other companies like the partners, the local country partners of a joint venture or a licensee or the employees working abroad may start using inappropriate technology in the production and the service delivery process. This would be a major problem for a multinational corporation, and that would damage their standardization efforts. And at the same time, it would also affect or negatively impact the standards in production and service delivery that they are trying to maintain throughout the world. So sometimes the companies may have to move away from their standardization efforts and use different technologies in foreign or host locations because their technology used in the home location is not inappropriate or is not appropriate for the local environment in the host country. So, it's important to maintain the appropriateness of technology for the local environment. So, in that case, the introduction of technology also may have certain cultural consequences, especially in less developed countries. How could this happen? When a multinational corporation tries to introduce new technology to a foreign location, the people may resist that technology, giving various reasons like health and environmental consequences. Also, sometimes the infrastructure facilities available in the host location may not be suitable for the introduction of this new technology. And also sometimes people may request to go with labor-intensive production and service delivery to increase the number of employment opportunities, especially in LDCs or less developed countries, as there are a large number of employees who are people who are educated but having no employment. And also in these kinds of instances, sometimes certain rigid local governments may regulate or control the choice of technology by the multinational company to suit their own needs in the local context, such as protecting the environment and generating more employment opportunities. With that, we conclude our discussion about the international business environment. So, talking about what we discussed as a summary, we mainly paid attention to the political, economical, regulatory or legal and the technological environments and how these environmental elements will impact an international business. So, if you have any questions about this lesson on international business environment, kindly contact me directly. Thank you very much for your participation and listening for this lecture. Thank you. Stay safe.